Good morning. Good morning. Uh, Today, the morning session is Fluxes Everywhere All at Once, talking everything about flux science. Our first speaker is Jennifer Watts from Woodwell Climate Research Center.
Get this into oops, a little more setup. All right. So good morning. Thanks for getting up early. We're going to head to the Arctic and talk about fluxes everywhere up north. So this is the Arctic-Boreal permafrost region, also like to call the terrestrial cryosphere. And this region is quite extensive, almost 19 million square kilometers. That's about almost a quarter of the total land area in the Northern Hemisphere. This region is characterized by frozen ground, permafrost. We also have a lot of seasonally frozen and thawed layers above the permafrost. Uh, and we have the boreal in the green, and then the tundra, the non-treed lands further north, shown in tan. And I'll point out that a majority of this region, over 60%, lies within the political bounds of the Russian Federation. So keep that in mind. So the high latitudes are currently warming now over 4 times faster than elsewhere on Earth, and we expect that this rampant warming will continue well into the future in absence of drastic global emission reduction efforts. And this is a huge problem for our Earth because these ecosystems store over 1.5 trillion tons of carbon in the soils alone. And with climate change, the soils are thawing, microbial activity is increasing, and greenhouse gases are being released into the atmosphere, primarily as CO2, but in really wet conditions, we also have methane, which is even more potent than CO2. Well, although we really don't know how much carbon is being lost from the permafrost now or in the future, our current model estimates show that we may lose up to 550 gigatons of carbon if we proceed with a business as usual climate. And that's more than what's projected for future emissions for the United States. And it's more carbon that's been currently stored in tree biomass globally. This is a really big deal. And this motivates us as a science community to answer two important questions around this issue. First of all, how much carbon is currently being released from across the region? And what's going to happen in the future? And then how much carbon is being uptake to combat that release through plant activity? And what's that going to look like in the future? So we put the two together, we're asking about ultimately what's the net ecosystem exchange of CO2 for this region, and then considering other gases as well. Well, it turns out that these questions aren't new. We've been asking these for over half a century, if not more. We see evidence of this from early flux work done in the Arctic, including that by William Dwight Billings, who was an early pioneer in Arctic ecology. And their 1982 paper asked, is the Arctic tundra a net sink or source of CO2 in a changing environment? Well, their results indicated that at that time, the tundra was a net sink of carbon, but it was really based on a few chamber-based studies in the summer and ignore the winter season. Well, fortunately, to better answer these questions in the 1990s, the National Science Foundation sponsored the Land Atmosphere Ice Interactions Program, and it put together a good use of an emerging technology, eddy covariance towers, that could cover a lot more area. And the group placed the towers at multiple locations across the Alaska North Slope, and they sampled CO2 fluxes representing multiple dominant vegetation communities. This was preceded by the Atlas program, which added additional towers in tundra, including a couple in Siberia, to better test and inform process models. Simultaneously, Boreas was happening in Canada in the boreal forest, and this was enabled through multi-agency collaborations between the US and Canada. And the goal here was to better understand gas exchange between the Earth and atmosphere, to improve models, and to predict what might happen under a future climate. Well, suddenly, with all these towers going up, there was a lot of Flux data available. And there were also repositories coming online, AmeriFlux and FluxNet, that were hosting the data and making the data available for analysis and for use by more and more modelers. So we see a shift from, on the left, we have Dave McGuire's 2000 paper, one model calibrated by one tower. The resulting map is the result of calibration based on one tower. And then we shift away from that, fortunately, so we have more and more towers informing more and more models. And these early results, what did they find? Well, first of all, based on these model results, they were saying that um, from the 2000s into the 1990s into the 2000s, they were estimating that the North was primarily a carbon sink, and they predicted that carbon sink would increase over time with climate warming. They also addressed two key uncertainties. First of all, they realized that ecosystem moisture was really important, but highly uncertain, and that was impacting their model estimates. And they also recognized that the process models weren't really well representing permafrost characteristics and thaw-driven CO2 loss. So these were notes that they made early on. So let's fast forward a few years to 2017. The Arctic permafrost problem is still making headlines. We see this in the Washington Post. Climate change could destroy a lot more permafrost than we thought. Well, is the Arctic community now in a better place with our models to answer this question of, is the Arctic a carbon sinker source, and what's going to happen in the future? What do you think? No. It turns out that we had problems. We were seeing a lot of disagreement between our models, even more so than before, although we did have more models available in the space. And they were disagreeing. They couldn't tell us with any certainty, is the Arctic at present a sinker source? And this is problematic. If we don't understand what's happening today, we really can't guesstimate very well what's going to happen in the future. So this led to a series of discussions that started taking place within the Arctic community, facilitated through the Permafrost Carbon Network, to identify how the Flux community could better aid the modelers and the policymakers. And after these conversations, we identified a few potential barriers to making progress in the Arctic world. First of all, we heard from process modelers who are running these really complex models at monthly time stubs that half-hourly fluxes on repositories really aren't very useful to them. They're already really busy. It takes a lot of work to reprocess to what they need. Instead, they were requesting that we hand them the data in tidy monthly average packages, along with the metadata that they need for their models. So they don't want just the fluxes, they also need to understand what's happening at these sites through metadata. We also found that not all of the data was making its way into the repositories like AmeriFlux or FluxNet. A lot of the tower PIs were just too busy. They didn't have time to go through the process. And so some towers just weren't represented at all. And we kept hearing about these towers being available, but we didn't have data. In other cases, some of the data was available, but it wasn't the full data package, maybe just a few years, not every year represented by the tower. The third point was we found that some of the data on repositories were actually outdated. The tower PIs had identified problems with the data and reprocessed, but had failed to upload the data. And then we also realized that we're dealing with a large region and we need as much flux data as possible. So maybe there's a value in bringing in chamber-based fluxes in addition to the tower fluxes. And then the really important component was we realized that there's this multi-year latency a lot of times from when the data is collected to when it actually is available to the public because data processing takes time. You're going to get it into a publication potentially before you release it. But the Arctic is changing so fast and we need to know what's happening now. So we wanted to try to build a system that would facilitate getting the data to the community closer to real time. This led to a special synthesis working group formed in 2018, led by Ted Schur and supported through the Permafrost Carbon Network and the Arctic Data Center. This kick-started with 2 workshops in Santa Barbara. A few of us may recognize our faces pre-COVID. We were a bit younger then. And through this group, we designed and led a community-wide survey to identify first all the locations of flex sites in the Arctic, and then we asked PIs to share their best quality data with us and their metadata. So this app designed by Matthias Gekety and Max Planck shows the result of our Flux site survey. And we see that we didn't stop at just recognizing and identifying the Flux towers. We're also accounting for chamber sites, tall towers, airborne activity, etc. The next step was then to compile all that data provided by the community PIs in that tidy monthly average package format that modelers were asking for. And this resulted in ABC Flux version 1, led by Anna Verkala and published a few years ago. In version 1, we had a total of 244 unique sites that we found for both Flux towers alone. And actually, I think that does include some chambers. It goes down to 157 sites if we consider areas where towers were grouped or chambers were grouped. We found that Alaska and Finland represented over 40% of the monthly average flux observations, so there's a little bit of a spatial bias there. And in total, we had just about 5,000 observations for NEE, which was a lot more than when we started. In the upper right figure for boreal, we see that the 2000s through 2015 had the most fluxes, and this shifts a little bit for the tundra. And if we look in the lower figure, this shows the overall distributions of the fluxes for the full time period. The boreal on the left, tundra on the right. So let's do some on-the-fly analysis here. And we see that if we average over the full period, both systems are a net carbon sink. Boreal, a lot more than tundra. The next step for us was to examine these records to identify longer term patterns. And this led to a study published in Nature Climate Change a few months ago by Craig C. at NAU. So looking at the results for decadal changes in NEE, bend according to month, we see that The net CO2 sink in the summer is indeed increasing, more so for permafrost and their growing season. So permafrost impacted sites, they're increasing their growing season sink, so it's extending out into the spring and the autumn months. So if we looked only here, if we only stopped in the summer, I mean, this is a quite nice result, right? From a climate perspective, but there's got to be a catch. Yeah, the rest of the seasons. And here we see that the non-growing seasons are turning out to have a lot more increase in net CO2 emissions, especially in autumn and in the permafrost region. And this is driven by deeper and deeper thaw of soils due to the climate warming. Now, I'm just showing here the results for permafrost versus non-permafrost. What about the difference between boreal and tundra? Well, we did look at that and we found that any response to warming over time is similar between the two. However, there's some indication in the data that warmer and warmer summers are leading to reduced boreal uptake. So it's something we need to keep an eye on. The next step was to scale the ABC Flux data to the full region, and we did this using random forest models and information from satellites. The resulting study, led by Anna Verkala, is currently in revision in Nature Climate Change and available online as a preprint. So our results from the upscaling activity indicate that on average, the NEE sink is about, for the full permafrost region, it's still a net sink, about 249 teragrams of carbon per year. If we extend the region even further south into the boreal zones where permafrost no longer exists, we greatly increase that sink. We found that the Alaska boreal region is now quite an anomaly compared to other boreal regions, and that it is closer to NEE neutral. It's getting closer and closer to a source. We also found that there is an increasing trend in the Russian boreal NEE sink, and that's quite substantial. We need to investigate that sink is real. However, those findings for the boreal Russian forests are actually really similar to those that came out in a NASA study using remote sensing informed hybrid process model instead of machine learning. And this was published last year in Global Change Biology. So circling back to Anna's paper, uh, when we started to account for emissions coming from fire, and this is more and more prevalent each year, our story changes. And with the full Arctic boreal region, after accounting for fire, the sink decreases. It's still very much a sink. However, just looking at that more northern permafrost region, accounting for fire, we're getting really close to CO2 neutral. And there's other considerations as well. In this study, we didn't account for methane. And for high latitude methane, the community is converging on around 30 teragrams of carbon per year. Nor are we accounting for carbon loss from aquatic systems or lateral carbon transport. And then we recognize that there may be a lot of carbon loss happening from abrupt thaw that we're just not capturing. We don't have data. So we have made some progress as a community. We have a lot more data to work with, and we're hoping this data makes its way into process models. It's already informing our machine learning models. But what other major known unknowns remain, and how can we address them as a community? Well, the first challenge is obviously keeping up with the data. ABC Flux activities were made possible through foundation grants. What happens when the study ends? You know, who's going to keep this going, and how do we keep track of everything that's out there? I also want to acknowledge that for the ABC Flux activity, repositories were really important were the data coming directly from the tower PIs, who felt more comfortable just giving us their data just because they didn't have time. So that's something we want to consider moving forward. We also are actively working as a community to improve data representativeness in time and space. On the left side, that's what the data gaps look like using the information from the first ABC flux. So lighter on that map means bad. We're moving over to now 2024. So the colors are reversed here. Darker colors are bad on this model output. And we're seeing that we're making progress, which is good. And then recently through Permafrost Pathways, which is foundation funded, we were able to strategically identify locations on the map that could best help us reduce the problem with representativeness. And we were able to install 4 of these towers, the white dots in Canada, this year, and then one more is coming up next year. And then also we were replaced the tower on the NG site in Council, Alaska. Russia is still a major problem, and this is impacting all our models. I'll wrap up pretty quickly. I want to acknowledge the problem with disturbance. We don't have a lot of data in the space, including in burn systems, in abrupt thaw sites, and insect outbreaks. This data bias is also impacting our results. But fortunately, I do want to make a plug. Thank you, AmeriFlux. The loaner program, we're hoping to address the problem of no data from thaw sites. And we're hopefully next summer, if all goes well, we'll have a tower right out there in the North Slope. Soil moisture is still an issue. This is impacting all our models. We need to better understand soil moisture status, plant water stress and status, and location of water, including open water and inundation. We could put out a lot more sensors. That's an opportunity for us. However, this is a need where we need to advance the technology. So help funding agencies and global space agencies. We need remote sensing technology that'll help us track water at finer and finer spatial resolutions across vertical profiles. And then finally, I just want to recognize, even though we're placing a lot of emphasis on expanding the spatial and temporal representation of towers across this large region, sites where we have intensive multi-year observations are extremely important. And a good example of this is NG Arctic, the 2 Flux Tower sites in Alaska, where they collected data across multiple scales spanning microbes to plot an ecosystem level. This is also what we need for our process models, and we need to get our process models right if we want to understand the future. And then I shout out, Sigrid let me know that of all the data collected, it wasn't the microbes that were the most downloaded, it was the fluxes. And so this just echoes how important fluxes are for the Arctic community and the global community.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the interesting talk. Unfortunately, we're out of time for questions, but please come find her during a coffee break or a long bus ride. Um, the next up is Sonia Wharton from Lawrence Livermore National Lab.
Okay, let's put this in presenter mode. Okay, this is gonna have to get all shifted. Well, that good? But this is good. I'll just hold it. Hi, everyone. I'm Sonia Wharton. I'm a research scientist at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And I'm going to give a slightly different talk today because we're going to talk about the atmosphere and actually what goes on over the canopies, but how we can use that information to help us interpret the eddy covariance fluxes. So these are a list of the authors and collaborators. There's quite a few of them because a lot of instrumentation come together to solve this problem. Okay, so why are we even interested in flow over the canopy? So I was way back when I was the PhD student at Wind River, and this was just a random day that I chose to pick to look at the NEE record. And so you can see that if you're looking at the half-hourly NEE, and this is before the corrections are made, there's a lot of junk in this, right? So there's nighttime photosynthesis in blue. There's yellow outliers, which are just huge spikes, and then there's gaps missing. And so when you calculate annual NEE, how do you make sense of this to get an annual NEE that is going to be representative of the ecosystem? So one thing that's really important, especially in tall canopies, though not necessarily just in tall canopies, is the coupling, decoupling phenomena that happens in the canopy. Because if you think about all your pools of carbon, right? So you've got carbon on the ground, you've got carbon in the understory species, and then you've got your pretty normally pretty significant LAI distribution. And then you've got your eddy covariance at the top. So all of that carbon and the mass and the energy have to get to the top of the overstory EC to get an accurate representation of what the ecosystem fluxes are. But within the canopy itself, there's a lot of things going on. And one is that you're going to have coupling and decoupling through various layers of the canopy. And Keenan did a really good job talking about how temperature changes along those profiles, how the overstory heats up. And so I was thinking, well, what goes on at the very top of the canopy? Because at the very top of the canopy and the air above, you get mechanically driven turbulence. And those sweep into the canopy. You can get low-level jets over the forest. You can just get top-down force TKE from wind shear events. And how does that affect coupling? So normally your tower only goes up to like, say, 10 or maybe 20 meters above the canopy. But what's going on above that? And so you can use atmospheric instrumentation to take those measurements. These are atmospheric lidar. So they're not lidar that look down and map out the canopy structure. These are lidars that look up, and they're tracking aerosols that move with the movement of wind to derive the UV and W components of the wind. And so one type of lidar that we use is called a profiling lidar. And basically it just creates a scan cone above the instrument, and you can think that it's just basically extending the Met Tower up a couple of 100 meters, but you're only getting wind, so this is a disadvantage. And we put these up at all kinds of sites. So these are some examples of sites that I've done and my collaborators have done. So we took it out to Tonzi back in 2013. That actually was a really easy canopy to study because there were big patches in it, and you can't have swaying trees in your scan cone. So you got to think about ways to get around that. So we got creative when they were looking for tower sites in the redwoods, and we found a pygmy forest. Declan, that's your site. Yeah. I'm going to shout out to people. And then I got this nice picture from Matthias Mauder at Toronto. They've been putting their LiDAR up in clearings. And then we've lately been putting them on towers. So we had a LiDAR at Wind River for running for a year up on that 74-meter tall tower. We just put it on the tower at Mountain Lake Biological Station, which is another NEON site in the Appalachians. And then that last picture, I got that one from Ebba Delwick. And years ago, they put a LiDAR up on a platform that they built over their forest. Okay, so profiling LiDAR are great because they're relatively easy to use and you get UV and W above your ecosystem. But what if you're interested in spatial variability, right? So think about if you could have a LiDAR that actually scanned over the forest or scanned so that you could get katabatic and anabatic flows because you're interested in that spatial representation. So there's actually a different type of LiDAR called a scanning LiDAR that gives you that ability. And scanning LiDAR are cool because you can put them in vertical mode where you just get the W variance at high frequency. You can put them in the VAD mode, which is the same as profiling LiDAR, so that you get a scan above the LiDAR. But then you can also do these 2D scans. So you can do a 2D scan in the elevation angle by changing the elevation angle, and you can do a 2D scan in the horizontal so that you're looking across at the same elevation angle. And then if you have multiple scanning LiDARs, you actually point them so that their beams interact. Well, not interact, but their beams are overlap, and then you can get the UV and W components with very small volume average. So that it's more of a point measurement than what LiDARs typically do because they're doing more of a volume average. So these are scanning LiDAR that we've put up recently, or colleagues have. So at Mountain Lake, we have 2 scanning LiDAR, and they're going to do dual Doppler scans over the forest and over the neon tower, but that's a picture of one of them. In the Redwoods, when we were doing the tower sighting, we also put one in a clearing. And then Holly Oldroyd, the second one there is Holly Oldroyd's LiDAR. And the third one is Holly Oldroyd's LiDAR. And they were looking at drainage flows in the Sierras, and they actually just stuck the LiDAR on a truck and had it facing down the road. And then we've been putting them on towers. So that is Matthias's Motter's LiDAR going up a tower in Israel. They've put one over an orchard, and then that was like a really early prototype of a scanning LiDAR that EBA got a hold of and put it on her tower. So this is the experiment that we did at Wind River. So it's kind of like putting all the data together. You've got all your different instruments, right? So you've got your eddy covariance, you've got your profile, you've got your LiDARs. We put in 4 sub-canopy towers at this site, which is part of an ICOAST project. You have your soil respiration chambers. And putting all that data together really to see how above canopy shear can impact this canopy coupling and quantifying NEE. And I won't show an example of it, but that we had a paper back in 2017 where we actually saw at Tonzi, you had low-level jets that come over the ecosystem, and they're quite low to the ground. And what that was doing, it was creating really high friction velocity at the overstory eddy covariance. So if you're using U star to filter your data, you're going to think, oh, your canopy is completely coupled because U star is high in the overstory. But that wasn't the case at all. It was basically a low-level jet coming over the canopy, and then the canopy itself, even though it's really open, was coupled. And so you still needed to correct the data. Yeah, okay, I'm going. Okay. Okay, so here's an example of the data that you can see. You can see eddies, you can see Kelvin-Helmholtz instabilities, and then those are the 2D slices that that you can see with the data, and you can see these shear events coming towards the LiDAR. Really fast, there's been a new development in AI that allows the LiDAR to actually decide what is the best scan strategies depending on the atmosphere, and Argonne has developed this. And then we've got this upcoming session at the Ag and Forest Met. So if you have a site that's in complex terrain or forests, and you're looking at how complex flow affects your eddy covariance, we're going to have a session at the upcoming Ag and Met Forest conference that we'd like you to submit to. And then any questions, or if you're interested in collaborating, because these are very expensive instruments, but the national labs have a number of them, so they can always take them to your site, and we can get some data for you.
We just got a slight extension from Christine. So is there one quick question from the crowd? Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Carlos Wang from UC Berkeley.
Hello, my name is Carlos Wang, and I'm a postdoc in Dennis's lab. So today we'll talk about, how advection affects surface energy balance, as well as, at the energy balance closure. So, before we start, I kind of want to quickly point out that our paper on this has recently been published in Ag and Forest Met, covering many different topics. And you can scan it, or if you want to Google Lady Gaga and advection, it should pop up. For the interest of time today, we're only going to cover horizontal advection and energy balance closure. So as we know, the problem of energy balance closure has been a conundrum within the community. But behind this seemingly simple balance from eddy covariance, there are many neglected parts that were now accounted for. And for our irrigated alfalfa site specifically, we hypothesized that unaccounted advective fluxes could lead to a lack of closure. But why is that? Well, at its core, eddy covariance idealize the ecosystem exchanges under steady state condition in an equal sourcing control volume, allowing the representation of fluxes through vertical exchanges. Now, with satellite remote sensing, what it tells us is that spatial temporal heterogeneity can often bring unexpected quantities in a way distorting and biasing our flux measurements. And so what this means is that under this sort of heterogeneity, what we measure with a single flux tower could also often be incomplete. So to better inspect the role of advection under the scope of land-atmosphere interactions, we should consider a two-dimensional flow. So here, the total time rate of a change of a scalar, which can be temperature or humidity, can be expressed with local storage, horizontal and vertical advection, and horizontal and vertical flux divergence. And so essentially, remember that eddy covariance only measures the very last term here. And so in our study, we further simplify the equation with a few assumptions to derive the new heat and water budgets with horizontal advection and vertical flux divergence terms. And now putting theory into application, we deployed 3 towers at the alfalfa site where advection of heat and moisture were measured at around 4-meter height. And then so for the rest of the talk, we'll focus on fluxes evaluated at the main tower here. And now to calculate advection, there are also a few more steps involved, including deriving the wind profile and the half-hourly scalar gradient. And additionally, we also conducted sensor intercomparison after each campaign to inspect and minimize the potential errors. And for our field campaign, we'll focus on 2 distinctive cases. The first case represents a classic oasis effect with hot and dry to cool and wet transition. The second case represents a cool and wet to hot and dry transition. And so for the first case, looking at the diel mean surface fluxes, there was low amount of sensible heat flux that directed downward in the early afternoon, indicating that additional energy was added into the system. And subsequently, latent heat flux was enhanced. But what caused this? Well, if we look at the temperature profile, it suggested that an internal boundary layer was present after 3 p.m., giving that temperature inversion. And so this kind of allowed the entrainment fluxes of heat from the atmosphere above to reach the surface, kind of like a downward flux. And now with spectral analysis, the mid-frequency spectral broadening indicated the potential effect of larger eddies, which may have contributed to this, entrainment fluxes and the enhancement in latent heat flux. So how do we know that? Well, if we use thermal remote sensing from Landsat 9, the hot and dry upwind lens likely produce these large convective eddies that allotted the cooler downwind evaporating field. And so this allowed the development of that temperature inversion and explains the downward sensible heat flux. And now looking at the flux evolution across the 3 towers, the latent heat flux at the middle tower was indeed suppressed, while the one at the main tower was enhanced. And we'll take a closer look at this with the McNaughton omega theory. And so here, the middle tower was moderately decoupled, meaning that the advected moisture from the upwind likely humidified the atmosphere and kind of suppressed the latent heat flux. But for the main tower, it was strongly decoupled, where non-local large eddies provided additional thermal energy even to the further downwind location, and resulting in that enhancement in latent heat flux we observed. And for the second case, what's so interesting is that even for a dryish site, we still have moderate amount of water flux coming out of the system. Where's it coming from? Well, again, looking at spectral analysis, the low frequency spectral peaks really indicated that effect from the large eddies. And again, using eco-stress LST and power spectra of temperature and specific humidity, these large convective eddies likely advected not only heat, but also moisture from the further upwind irrigating and evaporating fields, and resulting in that non-local and higher latent heat flux we observed in our flux tower. And so, the fluxes, of course, also evolved quite differently compared to the previous case, where sensible heat flux increased and latent heat flux decreased across the towers. But again, if we look at the omega theory, where values is that the low omega value clearly indicated the strong stomata regulation, where a higher stomata closure turned excess energy into sensible heat flux and restricted latent heat flux. And now moving on to the crown jewel of energy balance closure. And then so we included a few additional terms, including spectral loss, storage terms, photochemical storage and soil heat storage, and then the two advective fluxes. And so for the selected periods at the baseline, there was around 21% of the imbalance. And by accounting for spectral loss in both sensible heat flux and latent heat flux, the imbalance was reduced to around 16%. And then with the inclusion of the two storage terms, the imbalance was further reduced to around 10%. And lastly, when we accounted for the advective fluxes of heat and moisture, we're able to close the surface energy balance. And so, as a concluding note, what we've kind of learned from our study is that spatial temporal heterogeneity induced advection through non-local large eddies, creating competing processes between atmospheric demand and stomata regulation. Although we know that in a classic case that advected heat can enhance evaporation, but lower atmospheric demand from moisture advection could also suppress evaporation, really highlighting the complexity behind how advection can affect the surface energy balance. And now in terms of energy balance closure, it's really multifaceted. But as we from our study sites, by accounting for different terms, we're able to achieve good closure for 2 campaign seasons. But at the end of the day, there's no one size that fits all kind of a solution, and really advection could be highly site specific. But what's so important about advection is that as climate change continues, land management is expected to change as well. And so this is particularly important for agricultural land. So for example, operational remote sensing ET models from OpenET needs to account these atmospheric lateral flows in order to provide accurate and reliable ET estimates. And as closing out, I want to express my thanks to the Biomat Lab and then my collaborators at OpenET team, as well as GridBags and AmeriFlux Loaner Program for the sensor support, and happy to take any questions or reach out through me through email. Thank you.
Yeah, we have time for one quick question.
Do you have any recommendations based on your findings here that a single tower could employ to account for advection and the effects you observed?
We do, and then so part of the thing we also tested, we included in the paper, is that we measured the vertical heat flux divergence through a triple kind of sonic setup. And then so kind of in the short term sense, like a half hourly balance, it's really tricky to like account for where the wind is coming from, even having a non-preferable wind from like the non-predominant wind direction. But from these two graphs, what we found is that in a kind of a weekly or like a monthly timescale, we're able to estimate the amount of advective fluxes, horizontal advective fluxes, using vertical flux divergence.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Lianhong Gu from Oak Ridge National Lab.
Very cool presentation. There's no way I could beat Lady Gaga. So I worry I might ruin happy ending of a AmeriFlux meeting. So I gave you 2 options. One is to listen to my boring presentation. The other is to watch this movie. What do you say? Then, okay. Okay, so I'm going to do the presentation. Okay. don't blame me. Okay, so let's move on. And I'm gonna explain why this movie is even here later. Okay, so let me start with a challenge to all of you. In the language of an average fifth grader, explain why we close windows and doors when we heat or cool our house. I give you a hint. The answer is the same as why a fan can cool us when we feel hot. Anyone? Come on. Are you smarter than a fifth grader? Say it again. Save, yeah, exactly. Save money, but how? By how? Yes. Okay. So the answer is to prevent heat losses or gains associated with airflow, mass fluxes through the doors and windows. Okay. So this common sense question tells us heat and mass fluxes are intimately coupled, and mass fluxes carries heat, right? And from this common sense question, we know a solution for determining sensible heat flux must simultaneously contain a solution for determining mass fluxes. Any objection to this slide? Going once? Going twice? Okay, this is our current solution for sensible heat flux. So Cp is the specific heat capacity at the constant pressure, and rho is the mean density, and then W prime T prime is the covariance between vertical wind speed and temperature. Where is mass flux? Where is the solution for mass flux? No, there's no solution for mass flux in our current definition of sensible heat flux. Something is not correct. There's another issue. The current definition of sensible heat flux does not cannot account for heat haze. So this is heat haze. Heat haze is created when the surface is heated up. So the air near the surface expands and becomes lighter than the air above. And then with this change in the air density, light refracts. And also thermals rises. And here's the movie. The heat haze in the swordsman in the double flag time, and you can see it. So this is the heat haze. You don't need to see heat haze in desert. You can see it in the forest. Here's a shot, a video shot in AmeriFlux. If you look very carefully to the center of the video, you can see the shivering. This is the heat haze inside the canopy. Okay, so what does the heat haze tell us? Heating can lead to rising thermals. And heating can lead to production of kinetic energy because the thermals are rising. That's the movement of air. And because the air is moving up, there's a production of potential energy, right? And the heat haze tells us a solution for determining sensible heat flux must therefore account for transformation between different energy forms, right? Any objection to this statement? No? Okay, and then let's look at our current solution for sensible heat again. Our definition of sensible heat flux does not account for the transformation among different energy forms. We have another problem. Okay, so how do we actually develop a theory and equations for guiding our understanding and measurements of sensible heat? we have to start from the total energy conservation in the Lagrangian reference frame. We coupled that equation, total energy conservation, with mass conservation. And we derive the conservation equation in Eulerian reference frame. Why Eulerian reference frame? Because a flux tower is fixed. We need to use a fixed reference frame. But we cannot have that equation write down directly. We have to start the Lagrangian reference frame. From the Uranian reference frame, am I running out of time? Okay, so then we can derive two equations for A and E. One is from the atmospheric perspective. The other is from the ecosystem perspective. We couple the two equations together. We get the solution for the A and E of sensible heat. Okay, so this is the equation is actually much more complicated than we thought. And I'm not going to explain this equation, but if you are interested, contact me. And so how do we think about the sensible heat flux correctly? We have to understand that sensible heat is caused by temperature difference, heating and cooling. And we have to start from total energy, which is the sum of internal kinetic and potential energy. And we have to center on the concept of net ecosystem exchange. We cannot just talk about flux because you cannot apply energy or mass conservation to flux, which is just across a plane. And we have to remember mass exchange contribute to heat transfer. And that's my conclusion.
Thank you. We have 1 minute for one question.
Oh, cool. Okay, no objection to my presentation.
Lianhong, how do we transfer your theory to practice? And if we were to account for those transfer in the different energy types, how can we measure them?
Wait for my paper, it's coming.